Hey everyone, it's Alex, and today I have content. This month is Reading Woman in Translation Month, and more specifically, next week is the Woman in Translation Readathon, hosted by Matthew, Jennifer, and Kendra. So I'll be sure to link their announcement videos down below, but I thought I would contribute to this by making my own separate video with some recommendations. And I feel like this is really the most basic of basic lists for women in translation, so it's very 101 or probably books you've heard about already. But on the off chance that you haven't heard of these books, hopefully by me talking about them they might interest you, mainly because a lot of these are actually pretty short, I've realized, so they're pretty quick and easy to pick up. I actually wanted to segment these by region, so 3 of these books are translated from the Japanese, 1 is from the Korean, 1 is from the French, 1 is from the Danish, and then 1 is from the Italian, and I wonder what that Italian one could be. So starting off, I wanted to start with Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and this is translated from the Japanese by Ginny Tapley Takemori. We follow a woman in the story named Kiko, who you might have guessed works at a convenience store. I have a separate review of this book on my channel, but I can basically boil it down to say that I think Convenience Store Woman is the antithesis to the acclaim that it receives. I remember when this was first translated into English, I think back in 2016, that it was described as this quirky novel, which I only assume was to help enhance the marketability of it, but I found it surprisingly painfully depressing, but still as endearing as people were saying it was. And as much as Kiko actually enjoys going to work, the only perspective I have of anything like that is very Western with like late capitalism. But Kiko literally comments and says that she feels like her body is decaying, like it's on like this internal system. And so I don't know anything about the Japanese workforce, but what's interesting is that with Kiko being so straightforward that I kind of found her sedated but never boring. She's outspoken in her own way, but she's not quite assertive. And the story is just as much about the people around her and how they project onto her their own little idiosyncrasies about how someone is supposed to live life. And it all feels so petty and trivial in comparison whenever this book reminded me that we're all just floating on this giant rock in space. So that was my takeaway from this book, and I promise I liked it, but I just wasn't like exactly charmed. It is a charming book, but I can only imagine what I will look forward to with Sayaka Murata's new release coming out this fall. Up next, I have The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, and this book is also translated from the Japanese by Snyder. In this story, we follow an unnamed narrator who's also a novelist, and amidst her writing, she's actively in this dystopia where a part of the story becomes that she's trying to hide her editor because he's being captured or hunted down by the memory police. And as the novel continues, it loses its realism by implementing the actions of the memory police, but it still manages to maintain the characters' emotions as the forefront. I always find my head in the clouds when I try to latch onto stories with fantastical elements, but this story was a wonderful blend of the theme of memory and the actions of the memory police feeling simultaneously essential and accommodating to the overall thematic trajectory of the characters. To me, it felt like this book was a wonderful segment of just finding out the difference between cherishing and dwelling on memory. The Memory Police is actually one of my go-to recommendation books that I tell people about, so I really hope you like it if you pick it up. The third and final Japanese text I have is the Nakano Thrift Shop by Hiromi Kawakami, and this one is translated by Allison, Markin, Powell. At the most basic level, this is just a story about a girl named Hitomi that works at a thrift store, but then the story gets into this element of my brain just going on autopilot as soon as I find out that there's this unrequited love story going on. But what's great about this book is that romance doesn't feel like the goal. We get these little slice of life chapters from other characters about this universal perception about what love is like. It's all very charming and definitely one of the more enjoyable books I've ever read because I feel like so frequently I read a bunch of sad stuff. Characters are alive and animated and feel really good to be around, and this book also has one of my favorite endings in any book. So the Nakano Thrift Shop is definitely one of those getting me back into reading books that I would tell other people about kind of in the same situation. The next book I have is translated by the Korean by Deborah Smith, and it's The White Book by Han Kang. I really like Han Kang because this is the third work I've read by her, and it was a nice change of pace because this doesn't necessarily classify as a novel. I would put it in the realm of prose poetry, but it does classify on like the book itself as a work of fiction. And even though I really admire Kang's other two works, Human Acts and The Vegetarian, I picked this one because I really like what it's doing with a sense of autobiography. In this book, Kang ruminates on motherhood, sisterhood, and childhood, with these partial reflections of what it's like to live in the shadow of her sister's death when she was younger. And there's this heavy sense of fragility and sensitivity throughout the whole book that makes me feel in the gaze of Kang's sheer emotion, even with hearing the sound of me flipping to the next page. And the vividness of these scenes are somehow simultaneously panged with nostalgia that both welcomes you and haunts you. And for me, it doesn't really have a basis of connection through catharsis for the reader's behalf, but rather it becomes so specific that it kind of baits you with its own familiarity before ostracizing you with its specificity. And by specificity, I mean that literally there are photographs in this book that only enhance this suggested symbolism. So these photographs in particular were a nice reminder for me to not always approach a text with expectation, but rather release myself from the impulse of having things make sense through text and how that's not entirely always the point. I really loved The White Book, so if you haven't read Kang, I might still suggest reading The Vegetarian first just to get a feel, but definitely pick The White Book up after. Up next, I have The Years by Annie Ernaux. This is translated from the French and was translated by Allison Strayer. Similar to The White Book in how it blends nonfiction, Ernaux is pretty much doing the same, combining personal memoir and social history. And I say that because literally on like the dust jacket of this book, it is shelved within those two categories. And that's because Ernaux attempts to envelop her life from a historical perspective from 1941 to 2006. But in the later years, beyond describing her childhood, it makes the effect feel all the more heavier as she's sort of transitioning into trying to describe the status of the world as a whole, which makes Ernaux so renowned with being able to synthesize so effortlessly the personal memoir and this sort of collective conscious, with the latter kind of creeping in her own personal feelings, kind of like in an invasive way, with really big landmarks in history being described by Ernaux too. And when she feels that this is happening, it's not like she's trying to maximize her own importance in history during this time. Instead, it felt like I was reading a visual montage with experiences that, as they're happening, maybe to oneself, it doesn't feel entirely special, but upon memory it does. Kind of like if you're watching a montage within a Terrence Malick film. And with memory, I think Ernaux says it best when she says, "Memory was transmitted not only through the stories, but through the ways of walking, sitting, talking, laughing, eating, hailing someone, grabbing hold of objects. It passed body to body over the years, from the remotest countrysides of France and other parts of Europe, a heritage unseen in the photos, lying beyond individual difference, in the gaps between the goodness of some and the wickedness of others. It united family members, neighbors, and all those whom one said, 'They're people like us,' a repertory of habits and gestures shaped by childhoods in the fields and teen years in workshops, preceded by other childhoods, all the way back to oblivion." So this was really wonderful, and I really haven't quite read anything like it ever since. Continuing with nonfiction, I have Childhood by Tove Ditlevsen, and this is translated from the Danish by Tiina Nunnally. And this is just part one of 3 memoirs, famously known as the Copenhagen Trilogy. Ditlevsen's childhood, I would say, was pretty somber. She feels quite lonely despite her established connection with a best friend, unrequited crush, and a family that is at least involved enough to where she can paint them so vividly. The duration of childhood covers Ditlevsen through childhood all the way up until she's in high school, often trying to pinpoint exactly what childhood means or trying to establish when it's over. One way of doing this is actively describing what childhood is. At one point, Ditlevsen saying it's like being inside of a coffin, or vowing that she'll never share her dreams, like wanting to be a poet. And the inciting incident seeming to be with Ditlevsen, as we know, growing up to be a writer. It's whenever her mother, when she's younger, says to her that a girl can never be a poet. And a lot of these revelations come at the end of chapters as sort of a summary of isolating these experiences that it feels like Ditlevsen is compartmentalizing, which I think accurately captures the inherent naivety of being younger and so self-assured without writing it like feeling we didn't know any better. And this accrues with adding this sense of finality within the ending of this book being what finally feels like the turning point of Ditlevsen realizing that her childhood is over. Ditlevsen says, "Now the last remnants fall away from me like flakes of sun-scorched skin, and beneath looms an awkward and impossible adult. I read in my poetry album while the night wanders past the window, and, unawares, my childhood falls silently to the bottom of my memory, that library of the soul from which I will draw knowledge and experience for the rest of my life." Upon revisiting this book for this video, I finally ordered the last 2 installments of this trilogy, so I plan to read those soon, and I'm really looking forward to it. And finally, to end this list, we have a little indie darling, which is known as the mother of all translated literature. It's My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, translated from the Italian by Anne Goldstein. I already did a whole video on Elena Ferrante with this series specifically, and I think she's like an expert at having this great portfolio of spanning a story between 4 books while really reiterating that consistency of being able to follow a singular character for so long, and her being Elena Greco. We know from the very beginning that this is a story told in the present about the past, namely about Elena's life in Naples, Italy, and describing her enigmatic friend Lila. And honestly, just the pure effortlessness of crafting this world is unbelievable. Even while the story purely takes perspective from Elena's perspective, I feel so knowledgeable about all the characters in this book, and there are definitely a lot of them. But what's more striking to me is just how easily these other characters frame Elena within this universe, even though we only get Elena's singular perspective. For instance, Elena and Lila are known as being the best friends and pretty much attached to the hip. And meanwhile, there are characters like Nino, who is mysterious, but I would say much more arguably aloof. And of course, there are the adults in this book that sit at the parameters and the shadows of Elena's universe with her friends, feeling like they are these eerie portraits of the differentiation between how valuable youth is. And I think Ferrante does so well at describing your own mortality, or at least more symbolic mortality of relationships. And all of that cycles back to how so many of these characters have ideas of what their futures are going to be like, especially considering the future of Naples. So there is that sort of societal glimpse of the politics of what are going on too. And this book is just so satisfying and like so endearing and sweet, and sometimes made me sad or whatever else. And I'll fill you in by saying that the first book is the worst book. So as soon as you can get past that hurdle, I still like it, but the whole series as a whole is a wonderful representation of literature, I dare say. Ferrante has a new book coming out this fall that I plan to be reading with fellow Ferrante fan Claire from Claire Reads Books, so it'll be great to have that banter and being able to, in real time, actively talk to someone about a Ferrante book and being able to make sure I stay tethered to the world. But those were all of my recommendations for Woman in Translation, so I really hope you check these out if you haven't read any of them. And like I said, I will leave links to Matthew, Jennifer, and Kendra's announcement videos for this upcoming week for any prompts that you might want to do. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.